10-minute Bible study for Thursday, January 6th. Oh, wow, it's Epiphany. It is also the day where many of us have been watching clip after clip after clip of the events of last year at this time, the January 6th, 2021, which will live in infamy as the day that protesters, rioters, terrorists, whatever you want to call them, breached the Capitol, got past security, took over, and delayed the peaceful transition of power in this country. Epiphany, of course, is the coming of the wise men. It's the aha moment in Christian history. 6 days, not 6 days. What is it? 12 days after Christmas. Traditionally, that's when the Christmas decorations are taken down, and we kind of shift focus a little bit. But excuse me, today we want to look at Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 to 20. It is an often misunderstood passage, and I am going to do this quickly in a way that is going to totally be unjustified in the sense of how quickly we look at this. And of course, after this at 7 o'clock, and the credentials are in the description of the video, anyone who would like to is welcome to come on and have discussion about this. But we've been going through the book of Matthew. Jesus has been talking about his death. He's dealing with sometimes some tension among his disciples. They're arguing about who's the greatest and stuff like that. And then there's this really fascinating passage, and it's very clear. I want to say this from the beginning. It's very clear that this is Matthew reading into the story of Jesus, probably taking some teachings of Jesus, but reading back into them, because Jesus talks about the church, but the church hasn't started yet. And so, the church doesn't start until after his crucifixion and resurrection. They're still meeting as part of the synagogue, which is a different term. So there's some anachronistic aspect to this, is where Matthew reads back into Jesus' life and Jesus' teaching. He doesn't have romantic notions of the church. He recognizes that there's going to be difficulties and conflicts. And I just want to highlight the fact that this passage, I think, is often misunderstood and misused. And one of the things that makes me think it is the experience of having lived for 10 years in Thailand and seeing different cultural ways of dealing with conflict that are appropriate to their culture, and that this advice would be a challenge. So I think there are some cultural constructs that we need to be aware of as we extricate the principles, okay? So Matthew chapter 18, beginning with verse 15, it says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault. Sins, go and point out their fault. Now, there are some manuscripts that says that sins against you. But I think it's important to understand that he's not talking about does something you don't like. He's talking about something that rises to the level of some kind of transgression, either against you, against God, against somebody else. If they're sinning, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them over. If they won't listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, it's key to understand here that this advice is based on the Jewish culture and the Jewish law, because 2 or 3 witnesses could establish a sort of true story. So it's not he said versus she said. There's a couple of other people, presumably, who see the same problem that you do, who are corroborating what you're saying. And it's, the point is not to go from one-on-one to multiple witnesses. The point is to go from, let me start gently just by talking and seeing if we can work this out, to, if they don't see it, then take a couple of other people who've had the same experience and see if that helps, because the 2 or 3 witnesses corroborate what the first person's feeling. Okay. And my point about noting that is in Jewish law, 2 or 3 witnesses could establish the story, is to point out that that was a Jewish thing. There may be other ways to establish the truth of the matter in other cultures that don't involve bringing 2 or 3 other people into it at that point. So take 1 or 2 others along, so that, quote, every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Just by way of footnote, you can see this in Jewish law. Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 15 sets that out. So then verse 17, if they still refuse to listen, in other words, if you've shared your heart, if you've established, an agreement about the facts and about what's happening and who's being affected and how they're being affected, and they're still not won over, or they're still not understanding or getting with it, then it says, tell it to the church. Now, of course, the church doesn't exist when Jesus is talking. So I think this is Matthew reading back in and addressing issues that he sees in the church that he's writing to. It says, then tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, in other words, to the family of God, then treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Now, I've always heard this as, okay, then just kick him out of the community. You've done everything you could do. You talked to him by yourself. You took a couple of people with you to sort of gang up on him. People don't talk like that, but that's how I heard it interpreted, basically. And then you embarrass them in front of the entire community, right? And if they still won't deal with it, then you treat them as pagans and tax collectors and what was it? Sorry, I've forgotten the exact words. You treat them as pagans, and tax collectors. Now, what's interesting is, how did Jesus treat pagans and tax collectors? He befriended them. He loved them. He went to their houses and had parties with them. He didn't expect them to behave like faithful Christians or even faithful Jews. He expected them to be rough around the edges and just enjoy their company while not condemning them, but extending grace. And so I actually think that the heading for this in the NIV and in every other Bible that I've read, NIV New International Version is the one I'm reading out of, but I've seen this in other versions too. The little heading that the interpreters add, dealing with sin in the church. I've seen this used as like a method of church discipline, like a way to discipline members who, believe things we don't like, or who say things we didn't like, or something like that. I don't think that is the purpose. I think the principle is the importance of the relationships and the desire to, when someone is growing astray or when they're involved in something they shouldn't, the principle is that we're doing everything we can to help them to see the problem, to avoid embarrassment, and then to still feel loved. So, for example, this has happened a million times where someone who is in recovery has been part of our church life. They stop drinking, they find Jesus, or they stop doing drugs and they find Jesus, and they're all excited about it. And they come in, and then, I find out they're using again. Happens all the time. What do? Well, try to talk to them. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you need other people who've experienced it, maybe a spouse or a friend who's seen the problem and the destruction that causes, and they come in and you try to talk to them together. But what you don't do, and what so many churches interpret this as meaning, is you don't banish them from the fellowship. You don't kick them out. You don't treat them like outsiders. You continue to have meals with them. You continue to love them just as Jesus treated the pagans and the tax collectors. But it doesn't mean that the sin is okay. It just means that you show that the love is unconditional. Now, I could be way off on this, but that's my take right now. And then the next few verses. So then he says in verse 18, and I think these teachings are just kind of thrown together. But Matthew's trying to make a point. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. In other words, don't loose them. Don't loose them. Like, hold these people in. Don't let them go. Treat them with respect and love. even if you can't convince them to stop the behavior. Now, there may be times where you have to, set limits. Someone's behavior is destructive to the body. They're being rude. They're harassing somebody. They're doing something like that. You don't have to cut them off from all fellowship, but you can say you can't go into that area. You can't talk to those people. You can't be around that kind of thing, at least not in our body. But I still love you. I still want to have lunch with you. I still want to grab coffee. I still want to play golf. Still want to, go to the movies, however you relate to folks. So, our binding and loosing has eternal significance. Verse 19, again, truly I tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, and I think this may be included because of the bring 2 or 3 witnesses, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I will be with them. I'm not sure this teaching relates to the others, other than that I think Matthew includes it because the bring 2 or 3 to establish the facts, and then the 2 or 3 gathered together in my name. I'm present in a special way. If you ask for something, I will grant it. Honestly, I don't know how to interpret that. I've never seen a satisfactory interpretation. I'd love to know what you think. We are well over 10 minutes. We're at 11 and a half minutes. So I'm going to sign off now. If you'd like to ask questions or make a comment, do it in the comment section. If you'd like to join us at 7 p.m. for a live discussion on Zoom, the credentials are in the description. God bless, and have a fantastic night.